Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofOutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Starz TV series and everything in between. This is episode 58, Voyager Read-Along, week 16, chapters 42 through 45. Hello there! It's so wonderful to be back with you. Thank you for listening. There's some news that came out of Outlander world this week. Both Katrina and Sam have been nominated for Critics' Choice Awards. The Outlander show, Sam and Katrina, are up for People's Choice Awards. You will see links all over the place and follow them to vote for our favorites. The standalone version of the Virgins novella about Ian and Jamie when they went to France has been released, and you can purchase it on Amazon.com UK or through the Poisoned Pen, Diana Gabaldon's local bookstore, where you can purchase autographed books and non-autographed books as well. Sam received a great honor this week. For the Bloodwise charity, he was named the new Scottish president. And Katrina continues her I'm an Unusual Lady campaign for World Child Cancer. Those are both charities that are well worth giving to, so keep your eye out. So last week we ended with Jamie feeling like an ill wish doll with all the gleaming acupuncture needles in various places over his body. They worked and calmed his seasickness. And if you haven't done so yet, please go listen to the Outlander Science Club episode that Karen Doherty, emergency physician, did on it. The other thing where we left off last episode is the fact that Claire and Marcelly are sharing quarters and Jamie and Fergus are sharing quarters. And we're going to get more into that this week and what that is doing for everyone's frustration level. So let's start with Chapter 42, The Man in the Moon. Jamie doesn't have much to do until they get to land because the supercargo has to only deal with the loading, unloading, sale, inventory, dispensing of the cargo. He's not an active part of the ship's crew. Claire has been accepted rather easily as the ship surgeon, as the job normally would go to the gunner's wife, and she's seeing the normal injuries, but nothing serious. And because both of their jobs right now require very light duty, they have found themselves with plenty of time to reconnect and talk. They are without distractions of daily life or danger. They can just be in each other's presence. Them being sequestered on a ship in the middle of an ocean, and it's a possibility of months, this is their opportunity to share memories, relearn each other, find those special things, create new memories and special moments. They walk up and down the deck, marking the miles as they chat about everything and nothing at all. They enjoy the sights the ocean and sky have to offer. Claire speaks of the moon rising and it seeming to slide from the water like a phoenix rising. It was so breathtaking that even the sailors who had seen it time after time stopped and were in awe. It looked as if it hung just over the edge of the world. They stood together by the rail with the moon so close, it was easy to make out the surface shadows and dark spots. It seemed so close you could speak to the man in the moon, he said, smiling, and waved a hand in greeting to the dreaming golden face. Claire shares a quote and tells Jamie when she left, men were getting ready to fly to the moon, and she's wondering if they'll make it. And Jamie asks if flying machines could go so far. The airplanes? Claire explains it takes something called a rocket, and there is no air up there, so air must be carried in canisters, just like food and water. Jamie is curious and wonders what it will look like. And Claire tells him she knows what it looks like because she's seen the pictures. And she shares that with him. And finally she says, it's not unlike Scotland, except it isn't green. I think Western Wyoming looks more like the moon than Scotland does. And when he hears the word pictures, it reminds him of what he has in his pocket, and he reaches in and pulls out the bundle of photographs that Claire gave him of Brianna. He then wonders if Brianna will walk on the moon. Of course, he could go to that conclusion because he's going off of what Claire says, and it's all fantastical. It's a journey to an unknown place, just like they're on right now. I like how he simply rolls with it. And he's so curious. And then he starts to slowly look through the pictures. And he's absorbed by what he sees. And the edges of the photographs are frayed and dog-eared. And Claire watches him, sharing his silent joy at this promise of immortality. That is one thing about having children, is that it keeps your line going. And for somebody who is a Highlander and who family means everything and family name means so much, and where you're from and who you're from, for him to have his child with Claire is magnificent, and it gives him hope and peace. And Claire thinks back to that gravestone in Scotland that they found. And no matter what, no matter when they passed to the other side, Brianna would still be left of them. And if she has children, her children, and their children. That's one of the wondrous things about being a parent. And she leans into Jamie as he's still looking through the photos. The warmth of him she could feel through his shirt and coat. And he says he thinks Brianna is beautiful and clever. And then he comes across a particular picture, and it's of her playing in the surf at the ocean with her friend Rodney. And she's wearing a bikini. And he seems quite scandalized by this. The picture itself. And Claire thinks it's because of what Brianna's wearing. But it's not what she's wearing. He says women bathe in nature all the time, essentially, down to their skin. But it's the fact that there's a boy present. And Bree is standing nearly naked before a man. He's mortified. Claire has to explain that this is normal, and in that time people aren't too covered unless it's cold. Thinking to all the layers of clothing that Claire is wearing, men, their clothing has changed somewhat. But men have always been able to wear less clothing than women until the 20th century. I imagine that would be a great shock to him. And then it becomes really obvious that Jamie is not impressed with the morals of the future. Those social mores are what his daughter is living under. Claire thinks in all the ways she has seen Jamie as a lover, husband, brother, uncle, laird, and warrior. But never had she seen him as a ferocious Scottish father. He was quite formidable. She thinks maybe it's a good thing he wasn't overseeing her life personally. Well, if Jamie was overseeing Brianna's life personally, then she would have been born in the 18th century, and that would have been the norm. And Claire would have been the only one touched by the 20th century. And not the 20th century she just came back from, but from the 1940s and prior. Then Jamie asks this question: do you think she is a virgin? Claire assures him she is. But she's not willing to tell him about the sexual revolution of the time she left. He might have an apoplexy if he found out. He would send Claire back immediately to Brianna if he knew what things were like in the late 60s. He was relieved at that. I was sure of it, only Bree's a very good girl, she explains. Though she and Frank did not get on so well, they were good parents to Bree. It's a delicate topic. And Jamie, of course, wants to know everything. But it's not simply that things are different 200 years in the future to 200 years in the past. He can't grasp those differences. Claire has lived both. He hasn't. And they live in a time that is still incredibly dangerous. And it's not safe for young women, or any woman for that matter. It's not even safe for a lot of men. Finally, he puts the photos away into his pocket for safekeeping. This is such a wonderful bonding moment for them, and he gets to stretch his parenting wings from afar and have Claire answer questions and give him that space to learn about Brianna. And as Jamie looks at the moon, he becomes very serious. And he worries that Claire shouldn't have come now, though he's glad she did, and he tries to assure her that he didn't mean it that way, that he wants her so that his heart might burst with joy. Claire gets flustered by this, and it upsets her because she thinks he's trying to tell her he doesn't want her here. This shows the newness of their relationship coming back together. They can't completely read each other's minds anymore. There's work involved. There's going to be communication mishaps. There's going to be misunderstandings until they work out all the rough edges. And that's why this time at sea, when there's nothing else to do much, is really important for them to hone in on each other and to be a couple again, to be that team that they once were. And he explains further, for the sake of Bree, she's alone. There's no husband to protect her, no men of her family to see her safely wed. Will she not need of you a while yet? Should you no have waited a bit, I mean. And Claire has to get her emotions in check before answering. She tries to say things are different then, and he sharply says, I know. And Claire reacts quite strongly, pulling her hand away, telling him there's no way he could know or understand. But Bree is a grown woman. She'll marry when and as she likes. It won't be arranged. She doesn't need to marry. She is educated and can make a good living for herself. She doesn't need a man to protect her. Jamie glares back, thinking it's a very poor time when a woman does not need the protection of a man or to be cared for. This is where the subtleties and the differences of era have impact. Claire explains that it's not for necessity that Bree will have to do any of those things, but for love. And his response, you took me from need when we wed, and I came back for love. Do you think I needed you any less only because I could feed myself? And at this, he relaxes through his body. No, I do not think that. And that is good communication. Even though there are going to be gaps in language and understanding, they always come back. We see them working back around to that ease and that trust and that comfort level. The foundation is there for them, but 20 years is a long time, and all their experiences are going to affect how they see and treat each other as well. This is one of the reasons why many of us say that Outlander is a very good marriage manual. That if you look at how they come around to things in their imperfections, in their idiosyncrasies, in places where they dig their heels in and they shouldn't, where they get mad and they don't have all the information, but they come back around and they find their way to understand each other and to find a place that works. And he pulls Claire close, and she says she too is worried about the timing of leaving Bree, but Bree insisted, and she's still worried. And Claire starts to tell him about the letter she left for Brianna because she thought she would never see her again. She included everything she could think of, practical knowledge, motherly advice, and wisdom. She expects Bree will ignore it all and have a wonderful life, but she'll always know Claire thought about her. And she gets into the nitty-gritty. The week it took her to find all the important documents and family things. Going through Frank's family things took time because they were numerous, but Claire's were much easier. A simple box that Uncle Lamb had kept for her. Birth certificates, marriage lines, even the registration for the car that had killed her parents, and she couldn't figure out why her uncle had saved it. And it's not as if Claire had not gone through that box before, because she had when she was young, and she missed her mother, and she wanted to know them and see them, and she especially liked the photographs. And the one that was her favorite is a close-up of her mother's face. Uncle Lamb had said some of the details were wrong, but Claire didn't care. And she thought that the time of deep need had passed for Brianna. But even still, Claire had had a studio portrait commissioned of herself the week before she left. She wanted Brianna to have that left of her, and then she wrote the letter. I lost my mama when I was 10.5 years old, and yes, there's an age that you get to where you get past that deep need. It doesn't mean you don't miss, and I know many of you have lost a mother or a father or the person who stepped in to be your parent. The missing never goes away, but that deep need of a child, it does eventually go away. I would pour through the little pictures that I had as well, open the box and dig through it. And then we get into the details of the letter, and it's poignant and beautiful and sometimes funny, and I'm going to read a bit of it. Claire recalls her hands shaking before she started writing. Get a grip on yourself, Beecham. Write the bloody thing and have done. If she doesn't need it, it will do no harm, and if she does, it will be there. So she picked up the pen and began again. I don't know if you will ever read this, but perhaps it's as well to set it down. This is what I know of your grandparents, your real ones, your great-grandparents, and your medical history. And then she gets to the more personal part. I don't know if you will ever read this, but perhaps it's as well to set it down. This is what I know of your grandparents, your real ones, your great-grandparents, and your medical history. You are my baby and always will be. You won't know what that means until you have a child of your own, but I tell you now anyway. You'll always be as much a part of me as when you shared my body and I felt you move inside. Always. I can look at you asleep and think of all the nights I tucked you in, coming in the dark to listen to your breathing, lay my hand on you and feel your chest rise and fall, knowing that no matter what happens, everything is right with the world because you are alive. All the names I've called you through the years, my chick, my pumpkin, precious dove, darling, sweetheart, dinky smudge. I know why the Jews and Muslims have 900 names for God. One small word is not enough for love. I remember everything about you, from the tiny line of golden down that zigged across your forehead when you were hours old, to the bumpy toenail on the big toe you broke last year when you had that fight with Jeremy and kicked the door of his pickup truck. God, it breaks my heart to think it will stop now. That watching you, seeing all the tiny changes, I won't know when you stop biting your nails, if you ever do. Seeing you grow suddenly taller than I, and your face takes its shape. I always will remember, Bree. I always will. There's probably no one else on earth, Bree, who knows what the back of your ears looked like when you were 3 years old. I used to sit beside you reading One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish, or the 3 Billy Goats Gruff, and see those ears turn pink with happiness. Your skin was so clear and fragile. I thought a touch would leave fingerprints on you. You look like Jamie, I told you. You have something from me too, though. Look at the picture of my mother in the box, and the little black and white one of her mother and grandmother. You have that broad, clear brow they have, so do I. I've seen a good many of the Frasers, too. I think you'll age well if you take care of your skin. Take care of everything, Bree. Oh, I wish... Well, I have wished I could take care of you and protect you from everything all your life, but I can't. Whether I stay or go, take care of yourself, though. For me. You should know, Bree. I don't regret it. In spite of everything, I don't regret it. You'll know something now of how lonely I was for so long without Jamie. It doesn't matter. If the price of that separation was your life, neither Jamie nor I can regret it. I know he wouldn't mind my speaking for him. Bree, you are my joy. You're perfect and wonderful. And I hear you saying now in that tone of exasperation, but of course you think that. You're my mother. Yes, that's how I know. Bree, you are worth everything and more. I've done a great many things in my life so far, but the most important of them all was to love your father and you. Choose a man like your father, either of them. Once you've chosen a man, don't try to change him. It can't be done. More important, don't let him try to change you. He can't do it either. But men always try. Stand up straight and try not to get fat. With all my love, always, Mama. I hope you don't mind that I read the whole letter. In the book, it's broken up with Claire's thoughts and her tears and all those inner workings that are going on. And I wanted it just to be heard straightforward, as Bree would read it. There's so much in that. And I know the controversial part of that letter is when she says to stand up straight and don't get fat. I don't believe it's because Claire hates fat people or Diana Gabaldon hates fat people. It goes back to the comment that Joe Abernathy made about when you haven't seen somebody for a long time, say at a class reunion, and the people who stayed about the same weight that they were the last time you knew them, they don't look like they've changed that much, even if 20, 30 years has gone by. But somebody who gains weight, it changes the shape and look of their face. They're not so recognizable. And I'm going to err on the side of that, on the side of Claire wanting Brianna to be the same as she was. She's going to be recognizable. And she can imagine her getting older, but still looking like herself. So much went on during that letter writing. It took her a week to get everything done and to pour herself into that letter. I think she did a great job. And she said the things that were most important and the things that are important to a daughter to read from her mother. And as Claire finished, she noticed that Jamie's shoulders were shaking. And she's not sure if it's from laughter or something else. And he thinks that Brianna will do very well. For no matter what poor Gawk has fathered her, no lass has ever had a better mother. Kiss me, Sassenach, for believe me, I wouldn't change you for the world. That's the right thing to say, Jamie Fraser. I think that Claire poured everything she had into Brianna and into her work. And that they had a good relationship when Brianna was growing up. And after the big hellstorm of finding out about Jamie Fraser and the time traveling and all those things calmed down again. And they built a stronger relationship than they had before. Then I think what changed for Brianna is that she finally saw her mother to be a woman. She saw her mother to be Claire, not just Mama, not somebody's wife, not a doctor. She saw her as a woman in her own right, in her own life. And Roger Wakefield helped her get to that place and to find some maturity. Because Brianna was a daddy's girl with Frank. And I think she and her mama had a nice relationship. But I think all the unspoken things that Claire carried with her, I think they left an emotional mark on Brianna. It doesn't matter if they were spoken or not. They were always there, and they were hidden from her. Are you sobbing yet? Try and breathe. Blow your noses, get another dram, have a snack, and come back. And in this telling and this sharing, Claire draws Bree closer to Jamie, and she draws herself closer to Jamie. They are able to bond over being her parent, even though Frank raised her. I can imagine the jealousy that Jamie has and the hurt that he has that he wasn't able to raise her. And he never knew anything about her until Claire came back. But all these details help fill those spaces and fill that sadness. These details make her more part of his life. Now we move into chapter 43, Phantom Limbs. So Fergus, Willoughby, Jamie, and Claire had been keeping a close eye on the 6 Scottish smugglers for unusual behavior to see if somebody was going to try and kill Jamie. So far, nothing has happened. It's been very calm. Claire finds herself losing some of her wariness while still being quite reserved toward all of them except for one-armed Innes. And she understands now that he could not have been the one to string up the excisemen on the Arbroath Road. So he couldn't be the one who's behind trying to kill Jamie. And she describes Innes as being a quiet man, but he's an exceedingly quiet man, even by Scottish standards. So Claire was not at all surprised to find him hiding behind a hatch cover, clearly in pain, like he's not going to say anything about it. So she asks if he has pain. And he tries to play it off. And he stands up, and then he immediately doubles over again in an and he's quite embarrassed. Claire insists that he come with her, and she grabs him by the elbow and drags him. She gets him into her cabin and has him sit on the table, shirtless for examination. So Dr. Claire is in the house, and she palpates his abdomen, describing him as hairy and lean. I think Claire likes men, just in general. She has an appreciation for them. And she believes he has gas pains, but wants to be certain. And she begins to turn inward so she can visualize and feel what's going on with the inner workings of his body. I think she always had the skill, and then Master Raymond really taught her how to do it and to take that internal inventory, whether it's of her or another person. So she begins to feel the gallbladder, appendix, intestines, and visualizing them with her hands. I'm sure her eyes are closed. If you want to see what this feels like to do on a friend, your spouse, somebody who doesn't mind you seeing their entire belly, have them lay down on their back, and you start up under the ribs on the right-hand side and gently move your hands from the right to the left and see what you feel with your eyes open and with your eyes closed. And then you move down the belly all the way down to the lower abdomen. Try it and see what comes to your mind's eye. See the difference when your eyes are opened to when your eyes are closed. And as she's feeling, she's pondering the horror of doing an abdominal surgery in the less than ideal 18th century conditions. But she also knows it will likely happen someday. She has him breathe in and out, visualizing the healthy lungs. And he sounds clear. And then she uses a rolled up vellum sheet for a stethoscope. And she matter-of-factly asks him when he had last moved his bowels. Of course, he does not like this. He's a very private man, but he mumbles something that sounds like 4. 4 days? Claire is not happy about this, but she listens to his heart and then asks if he can listen to his belly, and she can hear all this digestion going on in one part of his intestines, but then she can't hear it below. So, he does have trapped gas and constipation. And of course, he already knows that for himself. And then she grills him on his diet. And he's saying they got meat and the hardtack biscuits. And then she says, what about the dried peas and oatmeal that they had brought along for the Scots? Well, several of the men had been watching in the doorway, and they start telling her what's been happening. There was a peanut gallery. And she had been unaware of their dietary problems, as she, Jamie, Marcelly, Fergus, had dined with the captain nightly, being fed quite well by Murphy. And they go on to explain that Murphy refused to make the peas or oatmeal, that he was accustomed to the sailors eating whatever he gave them without complaint. And he thinks that the oatmeal looks like dog yak. And they were told before they left that they were to get their daily parich, but they've only had meat and biscuits. They're so polite. It's a wee bit griping to the belly if you're not used to it. Terrible accent, I know. They simply didn't want to trouble Jamie over it. They had already used the small stash that they had and had been cooking it on a girdle in the quarters. And Murphy had the only keys to the stores to get any more out. She said she would talk to Murphy. And as she's listening, and as Claire is listening to them talk, she is gathering herbs for Innes to make into a tea for drinking. And if he basically hasn't pooped by the next day, they will try something stronger. And in response to this, Innes farts. And the colleagues in the doorway cheer. Aye, that's right, Mistress Fraser. Maybe you can scare the shit out of him, McLeod said, a broad grin splitting his face. Innes beat red in the face, left quickly, and the others followed. So after Claire has an acrimonious debate with Murphy, Claire was put in charge of the daily parich making, but she was allowed only one pot and spoon for the task. No singing or making a mess in the pristine galley. Then as she's laying in bed that night, a thought struck her, that if these men had been Jamie's tenants, they would never suffer in silence. They would have come to him right away, if they had to at all. Jamie likely would have known something was amiss and done his best to remedy it. The distance of the men troubled Claire. She's used to seeing men have extreme loyalty towards Jamie, that they would do anything in a near unquestioning manner, and there was an intimacy between them that doesn't exist here. In the morning, Jamie had gone with a couple of the sailors in the small boat to catch whitebait. Upon his return, he asked her what she had done to Innes. He's hiding in the starboard head and says you told him he must not come out until he'd shit. I didn't tell him that exactly. I just said if he hadn't moved his bowels by tonight, I'd give him an enema of slippery elm. Way to go, Claire! Jamie thinks that with this threat, Innes will stay in the head until his bowels cooperate. Poop is funny. Not pooping is funny. Poor Innes, and everyone knows he hasn't pooped. And then to go sit in the head where your bum is 8 feet above the water, and you could get splashed at any time. Sounds like a good time to me. Claire says now that they have their porridge back, it shouldn't be an issue anymore. Jamie is surprised and asks what she means. She tells him about the Oatmeal War, the outcome, while he was getting a basin to clean his hands. And Jamie thinks they should have come to him. Claire says they likely would have at some point, and she found out herself quite by accident. Jamie has the same discomfort that Claire did about the men, seeing him as a paycheck and not a laird. That loyalty is not there. Claire assures him they like him well at least 5 of them do. Way to go, Claire. He speaks about how they do not know him well or he them, except for Innes. There was more died at Culloden than the Stuart caused, Sassenach. You'll be coming for your dinner now? When he said with those simple words, there was more died at Culloden than the Stuart cause. A way of life had died. Trust had died, along with the uprising. Loyalties had changed from the Highland way. Men maybe became for themselves. They didn't have fealty to one person. A week goes by, and Innes comes to see her on his own, and she finally finds out what makes him different than the other 5 men. But first he tells her about the phantom feelings and pain from his missing arm. He thought for years he might be going mad, but spoke with Murphy about his missing leg and Fergus about his missing hand. They both experienced the feeling of the limbs being there sometimes too. She says, yes, she's heard of it, and it's called phantom limb. She's not sure what to do about it, though, and stalls for time asking how he lost his arm. He got blood poisoning from a nail wound, and it festered, becoming infected. Though it was a lucky thing, It kept him from being transported with the rest. Claire's confused. The rest of whom? Why, the other prisoners of Ardsmuir. Did MacDu not tell you about that? He explains that all the other prisoners were sent to the colonies under a term of indenture to finish out their sentences, except for Jamie, because he was a great man, and Innes was no good for hard labor, having only one arm. He was let go and Jamie sent somewhere else. It was a most fortunate accident, except for the pain that sometimes comes in the night. What a positive attitude. Do you remember who else said it was a fortunate accident? Fergus did, because Jamie would take care of him his whole life if he ever lost a hand working for him. Claire says she didn't know that they had been in prison together, he and Jamie, and she was looking for something in her medical kit that might ease phantom pain. He further explains that he would have starved to death had MacDu not found him after his own release, and that Jamie inquired about all the men he had been with in Ardsmuir, and wondered if any of them had come back to Scotland or if they all were in the colonies. But Jamie only found one in Scotland, Innes. And while they're talking, Claire sees Willoughby and she gestures to have him come over to see what advice he might have for the phantom limb problems. He examines Innes and Claire takes note of what he's doing. He explains the arm is in the ghost world while the rest of the body is in the upper world, and the arm is trying to come back. And while he's doing this, he's pressing. And he says, this pressing will stop the pain, and then we will tell the arm not to come back. And like the other men, Innes had worked with Willoughby for the last 2 years, so he did not fear him or loathe him, and it didn't bother him to be touched by Willoughby. Willoughby looks in Claire's kit and he grabs the dried hot peppers, pours them into a bowl, and then ignites the herb. He sends the smoke into the ghost world, and then he turns and spits on Innes' stump. Can you imagine that? Totally not suspecting. You're sitting there waiting for him to do some treatment and you get spit on. That would be so insulting. Innes is taken aback, and he says some rude things. And Willoughby says he spit on the ghost. Ghost afraid of spittle. And not come back now right away. Claire smartly has a hand on Innes, and then asks if he's still in pain. Nope, it happens to be gone. And Innes asks Willoughby if he has to spit on him now whenever he feels the pain. Oh no, I not spit, you spit now. Scare you own ghost. Innes simply scratches his head. Well, I'll be damned. Still, I think perhaps next time I'll try your tea, Mistress Fraser. I love the amount of humor in here. This could be a challenging issue to contend with, but it's written in such a funny way. What else is happening here is Claire is building a relationship with Innes. And she's also trying to know Willoughby better, I think, as well. Even though he confounds her in many ways and she doesn't quite understand him, she knows that he has some knowledge and skill that is useful, and she can respect that. Chapter 44, Forces of Nature. Jamie says he feels a fool. The 4 married people on the ship are living in celibacy by choice, unlike the imposed celibacy of the crew. Oh, sexual frustration. He says, I've spent 20 years longing to have you in my bed, and within a month of having you back again, I've arranged matters so that I cannot even kiss you without sneaking behind a hatch cover. And even then, half the time, I look round to find Fergus looking cross-eyed down his nose at me, the little bastard. And no one to blame for it but my own foolishness. What did I think I was doing? He says rhetorically. And he glares at Fergus and Marcelly nuzzling each other. He is grumpy about not even being able to touch his own wife. And of course Claire grabs his hand and she starts caressing his palm with her thumb. So she's teasing him. He can't engage in acts of unbridled carnality, she says. She recalls some of their attempts that turned out terribly, one including a rat falling on Jamie's head. He glances down at their linked hands, as Claire's thumb is secretly making love to his palm. They couldn't keep their hands off each other any less than Fergus and Marcelly, even though they knew it would make matters worse, not being able to be alone sufficiently to take care of it. And then he says he meant well at least. And Claire tells him the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as they watch Fergus teasing Marcelly with an albatross feather. He tells her he wanted Marcelly to think about what she wanted and such, and the result being he lies half awake the night listening to Fergus lust from across the cabin and the crew grinning at him when they see him. How do you hear someone lust? Oh, well, it's only... And he rubbed the bridge of his nose, thinking, have you any idea what men in prison do, Sassenach, having no women for a very long time? I could guess, she says, not sure if she wanted to know firsthand. He tells her the three choices. Use each other, go a bit mad, or deal with the matter by yourself, He asks if she thinks him mad. Not most of the time, she says honestly. Does this make me look fat? That's what that comment reminds me of. He couldn't manage to go mad, but he wished he could have. But it wasn't natural for him, nor was buggery, he said wryly. She thinks on how some men in that circumstance could use each other out of sheer need and loneliness, but Jamie never could because of what Black Jack Randall had done to him. She now gets the story on how he was manacled because he fought when the soldiers came to get him. He couldn't help it. He broke that finger yet again in the struggle, and that there was no privacy in prison. They had to wait until the lights went out, for the only modesty there is darkness. This is going to get raw, and it's tough to hear. And Jamie only allows Claire to see these dark spaces and to see into his experiences and to share what he knows. These are not topics he would ever tell another person, and he's waited, holding on to them, and now he can share them. The picture of how in the dark and silence it was impossible not to know the accommodations each man had made to his own needs. It's so heartbreaking. He tells her of the irons he wore for a year and the 18-inch span he had to move his hands apart. And he could not move his hands at all without making noise. He found himself caught between shame and need, and he waited until the sounds around him were such that he knew any sounds he made would be ignored by others. If there's one thing I ken very well, Sassenach, it's the sound of a man making love to a woman who's not there. Sometimes people like to say that men don't feel deeply, they don't love deeply, they don't long or need deeply. Of course they do. They may not share it in the same way that women do, but I think when they experience it, it is so incredible that I wonder if it might hurt even more, because they likely will never share those feelings with anybody else. They'll never admit to it. So he's bringing her into his history to explain what hearing a man lusting means. I'm sure there's other ways he could have explained it to her, but he's a Scottish storyteller. And it's also an avenue to show where he's been and the imprint that it's made upon him. So he's shining more light on who he is because of his experiences, the choices that he made and why. If you've gone through harrowing experiences, very difficult experiences, things that have challenged you to your very core, I think we often find ourselves being less judgmental and more aware of human need, respect, and dignity. And when situations are not remotely close to ideal or even okay, people need to be given a lot of latitude with the decisions that they make. It's very generous writing that Diana Gabaldon does. Generous of human spirit. And as he comes out of this story, he shrugs and he looks like he's shaking off the invisible chains he was remembering. And it reminded me of the phantom limbs experienced in the last chapter, that he carries it so heavy in his body memory that he can feel the weight of the chains on him. He can instantly recall it, even though they are no longer there. As he looks at Claire, there is nothing hidden from her. He is an open book, and she can see the darkness in the back of his eyes. Again, she is the only person he would allow into this space. She too saw that need there, the desire strong enough to have endured loneliness and degradation, squalor and separation. Are you crying a little bit again? Physically hurts me reading through this. And as I read and take pages and pages of notes for the podcast, I find myself tearing up. These are words I have read countless times. I've listened to the audiobooks several times, and it still reaches into my heart and grabs it. That is some of the beauty in Diana Gabaldon's writing, and why we love these characters so much, as if we can reach out and touch them, because they display everything. The fragilities, the strengths, the missteps, good decision-making, bad decision-making, love, hate, anger, joy, pleasure, everything. And they stood looking at each other, ignoring the others as they passed by. And Claire thinks there is no more skilled man that she knows at hiding his thoughts. And right now he was hiding nothing. They're knitting back together the things of importance. The bridges are built, and now they're being buttressed. That's why I was saying that this is where their adventure really begins. I mean, about halfway through the book, it was getting back to each other. And now they're creating all things new. She could also see the depth of his hunger. She felt it too. It was as if her bones were dissolving inside of her body in response. She thought if she touched him, he would take her right there on the deck. I think that would cause quite a stir. As if he read her mind, he grabbed her hand and pressed it to his hard thigh. Asks how many times they have been together since she returned, and he counts them off. And that each time he left her bed, he was as hungry as he had been when he came to her. It takes so little for his body to be ready for her. And to see you stand on deck, with the wind pressing your gown tight to your body. This sounds like some pretty nice secret public foreplay they're having here. Words are sexy. The intimate eye contact is sexy. Not caring who walks past you as you're in your bubble. That's sexy. And they have nowhere to go to act upon it. When Claire had said they couldn't keep their hands off each other, and the consequences were going to be that it made it worse, here we are. His skin flushed with desire and his pulse was quickening. He says there are times he'd take her right against the mast and damn the crew. He's a wordsmith, this Jamie Fraser. Her fingers convulsed against his palm. Can you see Claire's eyes dilating? Her flushing? Her breathing speeding up? Yep, I can too. And what he was describing sounds like one of those romance novel bodice rippers. Pretty hot. I appreciate the nod to that throughout these books. Just like Claire being called a whore, or some of the other continual threads that go through the books. And the bell for the captain's dinner goes off, and the activity below vibrates her feet. Marcelly and Fergus go below for dinner, and the crew readies for the change of watch. They didn't move yet, though. They're fixed upon each other. Imagine what that would feel like, getting anywhere near their space or just witnessing it. That must be powerful. They're throwing hormones left, right, up and down. And a crewman comes and calls them to dinner. And before they went down to eat, Claire hands him a coin and says it's on account. Let's go eat. So he has a coin to cash in when they can find the right timing and place on the ship. I love how they play with each other. And there's this chemistry that you could cut with a knife. And it's not just sexual chemistry. It's spiritual chemistry. It's heart chemistry. It's their brains connecting. And in other physical ways. They are just an all-encompassing match, these two. When I see people who have that, I'm in awe of it. So the next day, though it was cold, they were out on deck again. They're trying to get away from the stuffiness of the small cabins. They took their usual path. But Jamie stopped, pausing to tell a story about the printing business. And from their vantage point, they could see Willoughby sitting on deck with a stark white parchment, ink and brush. He wrote deftly. She says it was like watching a fencer or a dancer, that he was quite sure of his ground. And then a crewman comes very close to stepping on the pure white parchment, as did another. And when the first man returned, he knocked over the cake of ink as he passed. Then he yelled at Willoughby for staining the freshly cleaned deck. So he's trying to blame and put fault on Willoughby for what he did. The second man came back and echoed the chorus, and he tells Willoughby to lick it up. Willoughby ignores the men, continuing his work, not looking up. And the first seaman, ready to escalate, starts to yell at him, and then a white handkerchief floats down on the deck in front of him. "Your pardon, gentlemen, I seem to have dropped something," said Jamie. And while he picked it up, the ink spot was mostly gone. The men looked at Jamie and decided it wasn't worth it, and made haste away. Jamie went back to Claire as if nothing happened. He light-heartedly talks to her, and she says it was nice of him to come to Willoughby's aid. Should she offer her cabin for him to write? Jamie says he's already offered his space, but he refused it, and wants to be on the deck. Claire quips the light is better, but it looks rather uncomfortable. And Jamie says he just does it to provoke the crew. Why? He says it's complicated, and has she never met a Chinaman before? She says a few, but they were different in her time. You know, they don't wear pigtails or obsess about ladies' feet, or at least they didn't tell her about it. Jamie laughed and moved closer. And this is where we find out exactly what the sexual thing about the feet are. So there's this explanation of the binding. It's hideous and it's cruel. I find it disturbing. Claire says it's disgusting. And after that explanation, he shows her with his fist what the foot would look like and how it's used, making a crude gesture. Claire is astonished. And Jamie says, in fact, Mr. Willoughby says that it's a most remarkable sensation to a man. She calls him Willoughby a pervert. Jamie laughs. He says the crew thinks so too, and well, he cannot get the same effect with a European woman, but he might try now and again. So to Claire it explains a bit why the crew doesn't like him. But what about Willoughby? See, Mr. Yi Chen Cho, late of the heavenly kingdom of China, were the barbarians. And Claire thinks about it, and she can see the point as she sees somebody with filthy feet right in front of her. "Even you?" she says to Jamie. "Oh, aye. I'm a filthy, bad-smelling guaufei, that means a foreign devil, you ken. We stink like a weasel and a face like a gargoyle." Claire is astounded. Yi Chen Cho could say such a thing to Jamie since he saved him from the docks. Jamie blames his forthrightness on when he is drunk and says when he's sober he's not quite the same, but he still thinks it. And he well knows someone would likely harm him if Jamie wasn't near. So you saved his life, gave him work, and keep him out of trouble, and he insults you and thinks you're an ignorant barbarian? Sweet little fellow. Jamie says he thinks he's the only one who understands him. Or perhaps it's because he remembers what it's like to have nothing but your pride and a friend. And Claire wonders who the friend was. Could it have been Innes that Jamie had in prison? I, for one, am thankful that the whole foot binding alteration for grace and beauty has gone away. Claire starts to say that she had a friend at the hospital, but then there's this loud exclamation that stops her. Damn! Blazing Hades! That filth-eating son of a pig fart! It's then she realizes they are standing right over the galley. Murphy is in a right storm. He opens something rank and needs it tossed overboard. In clear olfactory opposition, Claire claps a wintergreen-soaked cloth over her nose. Jesus Christ on a piece of toast! Jamie thinks it smells like a long dead horse. And as a couple of men get the cask and carry it up to dump overboard, it's a maggot-filled cask of goo. Even Claire, without meaning to, says, ew! If you can gross out Claire, really gross her out, it must be bad for everybody else. After it's discarded over the rail, one of the crew sees a shark. And he says they are good eats. And then we get into this whole shark hunting experience here. Sharks are tearing at the foul meat as the cask was broken open, and seabirds appear from nowhere taking small bits of it. And the captain wants a shark for dinner. So he tells them to lower a boat and get one. So we have this cask of this rotted horse meat. And now sharks are swirling around, and they're vying for it. And they're going to get in this little boat and try and kill a shark. The flurry of activity in the water reminds Claire of a National Geographic photo. Why, grandmother, what big teeth you have. I like how her brain works. It's weird. Enter Murphy. He offers a bottle of cooking brandy to Manzetti if he catches one and brings it back for Murphy. Jamie is eyeing Murphy and asks him if this is a personal or professional concern, catching the shark. Both, Mr. Fraser, both. They had a taste of me, but I tasted a good many more of them. That's a way to get back at him. That's how he lost his leg. And as this is all going on in the water, Murphy is yelling out shark dishes he can make to Manzetti. Everyone is transfixed on the boat and the activity of the sharks. No one even notices Willoughby going over the side. And they see him wrestling a giant bird in the water. Claire shouts in horror, and Jamie jumps in after Willoughby. Everybody's shouting and crying. Well, Jamie rescues Willoughby, who is still holding on to the bird, and starts making his way back to the ship. Now, not very far away is all the blood in the water, that rotted meat, and sharks going bananas on this food. And the shark wrestling continues. Jamie and Willoughby are pulled up back onto the ship, and then the shark was pulled up as well. And there were chunks taken out of him because the other sharks bit him, trying to get to the food. Jamie is stunned. He actually thought he could be eaten by a shark for sure, as the small boat had started coming toward them, with the blood trailing and the group of sharks below the boat. And he confesses he has a great fear of losing a leg. Seems worse than being killed outright. Claire said she would rather he didn't lose one either. All the while, Willoughby is clinging to his prize, a young pelican. And all of a sudden, the butchery of the shark begins. Murphy is most pleased as he strolls by with the tail under his arm, a huge yellow liver in a bag of netting, and a bloody axe slung over his shoulder. And Murphy says to Jamie he's not sure he would have saved Willoughby, but it was very brave of Jamie, and he'll bring him up a fine broth from the tail so he doesn't get a chill. Jamie and Claire ponder why Willoughby wanted the bird. Jamie thinks to eat, and we hear Murphy saying they're bad eating, they always taste like fish. And they're shorebirds anyway, and he supposes the bird was blown out to sea by a storm. Maybe for the feathers, for quills? And then Jamie asks Claire to go below with him to help him dry his back. Air quotes, help him dry his back. All of a sudden, there was an understanding that everyone else was well occupied, and they could go have some very quick private sexy time. Jamie is soaked through, and once they're back in the cabin, he cannot get his pants off. So Claire is reaching, trying to find something, and she finds a letter opener and tries to cut the strings. But then Jamie says, "Christ, be careful with that, Sassenach. It's not going to do you any good to get my breeks off, and you geld me in the process." And in their less crazed brains, they both start laughing. And then Jamie finds his dirk, and he severs the laces properly. His breeks are... He picks her up and in grand fashion lays her on the table on top of the papers and scattered quills. He doesn't care. Skirts up over her waist. Remember, women do not wear underpants. He's pressing into her. And she says, it's like grabbing a salamander, because he's wet. A blaze of heat in a chilly shroud. She gasps as the tail of his wet shirt touches her belly. And then again, when she hears footsteps. "Stop, someone's coming." "Too late. I must have you or die." This is urgent sex, to be sure. No need for foreplay. He had her quickly and thoroughly, she says, both taken care of. 2 minutes later, the door opened, and Innes takes in the wreckage of the room. I love the description of him looking from the table to disheveled but dressed Claire, then to Jamie sitting on a stool, still in his wet shirt, breathing heavily, and still red-faced. And he looks around and reaches under Fergus's berth for a bottle of brandy wine for Willoughby not to take a chill. And as he's going to leave, he says, "You might should have Mr. Murphy make you some broth on that same account, MacDoo. They do say 'tis dangerous to get chilled after hard work, aye? You dinna want to take the ague," with a twinkle in his eyes. I love that they will never come out and just say it, but they'll totally poke him and nail him for whatever the activity was anyway. To let you know, they fully know well what you were doing just now. "Aye, well, and if it should come to that, Innes, at least I shall die a happy man." So they finally got some private time, but it was a 5-minute quickie. Hey, if there's no other opportunity, who wouldn't among us take a 5-minute quickie? So we do find out next that Willoughby is training the pelican to hunt for him. He calls the pelican Ping An, which means the peaceful one. We get the description of him going through the process of training this pelican. He tethers him. He also ties a cloth around his neck and allows him to dive, and is able to bring him back in with the fish. And then Willoughby unties the cloth from around his neck and gives a small portion of the fish to Ping An, and then he has a portion for himself. Within 1 week, the pelican is completely tame. He doesn't have to be tethered. He hunts and comes back on his own. The crew is quite impressed by this, but they're wary of the bird's big beak, and they don't like to be near Willoughby, so they stay clear, as he writes most days under the watchful yellow eyes of his bird. And Claire one day finds herself watching Willoughby write, and he finishes his page and looks around and then signs it. And he sighs as he looks into the open sea. Like a job well done, a dream. And he folds it up. And he throws it into the sea. And it's caught by the wind and flies away. And dreamily, Willoughby turns around and goes inside. Doesn't even watch for it to fall. Perhaps He's putting himself into the paper, hoping for freedom to fly away. We now get to hear Mr. Willoughby's tale. It's chapter 45. As they begin to move more south, the days and evenings warm. The off-duty crew gathers after supper to sing, dance, listen to stories. Like little kids in horror stories, they like stories of shipwrecks and perils at sea. But as the days wore on, the stories became of home and not monsters. And somebody asked Willoughby how he came from China. And since they all couldn't understand Willoughby very well, and Jamie could understand some Chinese, Jamie translates for Willoughby. He was a Mandarin, well regarded. The badge of his office was embroidered upon his clothes. It was a phoenix. Didn't we hear about a phoenix earlier in this podcast? He was born in Pekin, the imperial city of the Son of Heaven. Fergus interrupts. He's offended about that description. He gets hissed at into shh. We learn he was trained in composition, but he needed work. Under Wu Shen, a mandarin of the imperial household, he is trained well. He rises rapidly in the ranks, and by the age of 26, he had received a great honor, and then he felt an evil wind blow for him. His poetry had come into view of the emperor's second wife. She had great power. She bore no less than 4 sons, and she wanted him to be part of her household. We were laughing in my house today because I have bore 4 sons, and I've been told by friends of mine who were Chinese or Korean or Vietnamese that I would hold great honor because of the sons that I gave my husband. So, hey, it's a pretty special feeling, let me tell you. I don't know what I win out of it, except I have 4 giants living in my house now. And they're wonderful humans. And the others wonder what is wrong with being asked into her household. And that it seems like it would have been very good for his upward mobility for his work, right? It was a great honor, but for his presence to be there, it was required for him to become a eunuch. And there were gasps of horror. Marcelly asks Fergus what a eunuch is, and he says she doesn't need to be bothered with it. So you ran, mon ami? I should do the same without doubt. Fergus is supporting him. It was dishonorable for him to refuse the emperor's gift. But he had fallen in love with women, all women. He wrote all his poems to women. To the taste of breasts like apricots, the warm scent of a woman's navel when she wakens in winter, the warmth of a mound that fills your hand like a peach split with ripeness. Fergus was scandalized for Marcelly, and he put his hands over her ears. Okay, Fergus was born in a brothel. He actually worked as a prostitute sometimes, and he was a full-time pickpocket, and he's scandalized for her. One of the crewmen appreciates his words, another, quite heathen, understands why he was an esteemed poet. And many of them lauded his words, and they thought they were beautiful. Remember, sailors are romantics. He tells of his fleeing and what it took to get out of China, and how he was nearly caught. He had to destroy his long nails because they proved who he was. He even stole a peasant's clothes to wear. And he'd been paying for things along the way, but he was robbed. After that, he had to steal to eat until he met a group of traveling apothecaries who liked his skill at drawing and took him with them. Once they reached the coast, he slipped onto a ship and ended up in Edinburgh. He had to leave the country because the emperor had a far reach. I am in exile or I am dead. And they all sighed. He tells of the second wife desiring to possess him and his poems, but yet she would destroy forever what she admired. He kept his manhood, had lost all else, honor, livelihood, country. His parents are dishonored, his ancestors' tomb fallen to ruins, saying he is now in a place where he is taken for less than a beggar. Okay, If he would have stopped there, everybody would have been on Willoughby's side. Team Yi Chen Cho. Totally. He would have made friends and influenced people. But Willoughby, or Yi Chen Cho, continues to speak. I am come to a country of women coarse and rank as bears. They are creatures of no grace, no learning, ignorant, bad-smelling, their bodies gross with sprouting hair like dogs. And these disdain me as a yellow worm, so that even the lowest whores will not lie with me. For the love of woman, I am come to a place where no woman is worthy of love. And Jamie, translating, realizes what he said and the responses of the men around. And he tries to salvage the situation and stops translating anything else. And the crew goes dark. And Jamie tries to say some encouraging words. The crew's sympathy was lost with the insulting conclusion to the story. Remarks were made as the men dispersed. Fergus, as he was leaving, said to Willoughby, if he made any more remarks about European women, that he would strangle him. Jamie helps Willoughby down, and as Jamie and Claire were leaving, Willoughby reaches down between his legs, without any lewdness, cupping his testicles, and he rolls them in his palm, and he says, sometime I think not worth it. And it's fascinating looking at perspectives. He thinks they're barbarians. Well, the Chinese, by and large, are not a hairy people. Diets are very different than ours. And so he would think we smell because we eat very different foods than he was used to. It's still like that if you go to any other culture that has a vastly different diet. The water is different. Bathing habits are different. They smell different. So do we. But the fact that he called them bears, very rude. Also interesting perspective because so much of history, beauty is looked at through European standards. And Willoughby challenges European standards. And what he thinks is beautiful is completely different. I think that's a good lesson for all of us, that our perspectives come from where we are and what we're familiar with and what we're used to. They can change, they can be broadened, but there can be bias as well. We got to see Claire and Jamie making those efforts to share with each other and fill those gaps, fortify the bridge stanchions, do all those things. And in something so powerful as how physical they are, they're not being able to use that form of communication because they're not sharing a cabin at night together. They don't have the opportunity to be together physically, naked, and speaking that way. So they're having to do it differently than maybe they would. This way there's less assumption and there's more detail put in. The next podcast will be on chapters 46 and 47. I'm still planning on posting the episode the Saturday after U.S. Thanksgiving, so be on the lookout for it. So please come and join in on Wednesday nights. We do a weekly Twitter chat that I do plan on keeping as the TV series kicks back into gear in spring. You can find me under Dram of Outlander, and the hashtag that we use for the chat is hashtag ADOO. And you can search for the hashtag and then click on it and you can see all the tweets. And if you want to participate in the chat, you just add that hashtag to your tweet and we will all see it and be able to comment and like it and retweet it, all those things. And you can find me on Facebook at A Dram of Outlander page. Instagram is Dram of Outlander. The website is adramofoutlander.com. You may phone in with your thoughts, questions, and anything else you can think of to 719-425-9444. You can also drop me an email to adramofoutlander@gmail.com. And if you like the podcast and you enjoy what I do, please consider supporting me through Patreon. It's patreon.com/A Dram of Outlander. And the goal is to be a listener-supported podcast. And there will be some special things there for those who do financially support the show. And please be on the lookout for the Outlander Science Club installment. It will be up on Sunday. I will be doing it this week. And 2 topics are vying for my attention, so we will see which one wins out. And until next time, slán je va.